Hello, today we'll go over the value of science by Richard Feynman, which is a talk given before the US Academy of Sciences uh, at the California Institute of Technology in the year 1955. So this talk was included as a lesson in the 2006 first PU textbook of science, first PU textbook of English of Karnataka state. So this time we will look at some philosophical and psychoanalytic relevancies which are relevant to this text. So the value of science by Richard Feynman. So it says, from time to time, people suggest to me that scientists ought to give more consideration to social problems, especially that they should be more responsible in considering the impact of science upon society. So, from time to time, occasionally, ordinary people, that is, laymen, suggest to the author, that is, Richard Feynman, that scientists like himself should give more consideration to social problems. Social problems are the problems facing society. Social means that which has to do with society. So, what are the problems in society right now? There's a problem of hunger, there's a problem of housing, there's a problem of clothing, and so many illnesses, unhygienic living conditions. There are many problems which society is faced with, and people suggest that scientists should pay more attention to the problems of hunger, malnutrition, poverty, and so on and so forth. So, especially that they should be more responsible in considering the impact of science upon society. So, there are scientists who have considered the impact of science upon society. For example, in our own country, there was the great scientist M.S. Swaminathan, who ushered in the Green Revolution in our country. So he made India from a food dependent country into a food exporting country. We used to import wheat and rice from other countries until until M.S. Swaminathan invented newer varieties of rice which would grow during the monsoon, which made India self-reliant in terms of food, and uh, we have not faced any famine since the 1970s, when the Green Revolution was ushered in by M.S. Swaminathan under the guidance of Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister. So there are scientists who consider the impact of science upon society, but ordinary people suggest to the author Richard Feynman that many more scientists should pay attention to the impact of science upon society. The same suggestion must be made to many other scientists, and it seems to be generally believed that if the scientists would only look at these very difficult social problems and not spend so much time fooling with the less vital scientific ones, great success would come of it. So, the same suggestion that is, scientists should pay more attention to the impact of science on society must have been made to many other scientists. And it's generally believed, says the author, that if scientists would only look at these very difficult social problems and not spend so much time fooling with less vital scientific ones, great success would come of it. There have been thinkers who have gone over these very difficult social problems, and in a way, if one were to follow their teachings, the problem of food, clothing, and shelter would be alleviated, it would be removed. There would not be problems anymore. So, for example, the philosopher Henry David Thoreau, in his experiment at Walden Pond in the 19th century, suggested that man should cultivate only as much land as is required to feed him and his dependents, and build a small waterproof shelter with his own hands, and get some clothing made by in his own house from wool, from cotton, from other such material, then one of the ends of life would have been met. One of the ends of life is to provide ourselves with food, clothing, and shelter. So people generally follow profession, but one of the reasons they follow the profession is to provide themselves with these basic necessities. So thinkers like Thoreau, and in Japan there was a farmer called Masanobu Fukuoka, whose there was a lesson on Masanobu Fukuoka in the first period textbook of science of 2003. And he suggests that no artificial fertilizer, no artificial pesticides, insecticides should be used on a farm. All the crops should be protected by the natural enemies of the pests, like earthworms, which will not only fertilize the soil but will also help to keep pests at bay. And farmers like Masanobu Fukuoka and philosophers like Henry David Thoreau have considered these very difficult social problems. But what people suggest to the author is that scientists like himself, like he's a physicist. Richard Feynman is a physicist, and indeed there is a nuclear scientist who is a living legend at the present from our own country called Vandana Shiva, who has suggested many solutions to the food crisis which the world is facing today. So the solution that Vandana Shiva suggests is called biodiversity farming, wherein different crops are grown on the same farm at different times of the year. Thereby, the natural forms of pesticides and natural insecticides are used, so that not only is the soil replenished with its nutrients, but a higher yield per acre is given. So there are scientists who look at these very difficult social problems. Vandana Shiva has tried to solve the food crisis. Henry David Thoreau, in his experiment at Walden Pond, as was said, suggested a solution to the meeting of the three basic necessities by everyone. And Masanobu Fukuoka has also suggested how organic farming can be used to alleviate the food crisis. So, uh, people suggest that great success would come of it if all the scientists were to put their efforts into solving the problems facing society. So, next paragraph. It seems to me that we do think about these problems from time to time, but we don't put full time effort on them. The reason being that we know we don't have any magic formula for solving social problems. That social problems are very much harder than scientific ones, and that we usually don't get anywhere when we do think about them. So, according to the author Richard Feynman, so social problems are very much more difficult because they're faced by a larger number of people than scientific problems are faced by. And when the scientists put their full-time effort in, they don't put a full-time effort into solving social problems because there is no magic formula. Um, so, um, uh, next paragraph it says, I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy. And when he talks about a non-scientific matter, he will sound as naive as anyone untrained in the matter. So, a scientist looking at non-scientific problems, if you give a physicist like Richard Feynman, uh, if you ask him a solution to the problem of hunger, uh, he will sound just as dumb as the next guy. And when he talks about a non-scientific matter, he'll sound as naive or as childish as anyone untrained in the matter. Since the question of the value of science is not a scientific subject, this talk is dedicated to proving my point by example. So, the question that is being considered in this talk is the value of science. Now, value is something that cannot be measured. It cannot be measured like we measure distance or we measure speed or we measure velocity. It cannot be measured. Value is something which cannot be uh, put in objective terms. So he wants to prove that science has value, um, and but it's not a scientific subject. So he would try to tell us the value of science, but he says that it should be understood that considering the value of science is not a scientific subject. So he might seem as uh, he may sound a bit unconvincing. The first way in which science of value is familiar to everyone, he says. It is that scientific knowledge enables us to do all kinds of things and to make all kinds of things. So, scientific knowledge um, enables us to do all kinds of things. For example, we can harness all the forces of nature. We can harness, for example, the layers of the atmosphere. The radio waves are bounced off the ionosphere. Wi-Fi is broadcast throughout the world through the atmosphere, and all the natural resources are used to make our lives more comfortable. For example, wood is used to build furniture, iron is mined to build vehicles and many other things, and the natural resources of the earth are used with the help of the products of science to make all kinds of things and to do all kinds of things. So, this value of science is familiar to everyone. Of course, if we make good things, it is not only to the credit of science, It is also to the credit of the moral choice which led us to good work. So, if we do good things with the help of science, uh, it is not only to the credit of science, it is also to the credit of the user of science which led to the good work. Scientific knowledge is an enabling power to do either good or bad, but it does not carry instructions on how to use it. Uh, so, uh, now, uh, if we take something like a knife is a knife. It doesn't carry instructions on how to use it. We can use it to either slice bread or to slice someone or something else. So, a knife is can be compared to science. Just as a knife doesn't carry instructions on how to use it, science and the products of science also do not carry instructions on how to use them. So, because science is an enabling power, it has evident value, even though the power may be negated by what one does. Uh, Now, I learned a way of expressing this common human problem on a trip to Honolulu. So the author, Richard Feynman, went on a trip to Honolulu, which is the capital of the Hawaiian Islands, which are off the coast of the US. In a Buddhist temple there, the man in charge explained a little bit about the Buddhist religion for tourists and then ended his talk by telling them he had something to say to them that they would never forget, and I have never forgotten it. It was a proverb of the Buddhist religion. To every man is given the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell. So, here we can understand the thoughts of some relevant authors who have observed this. For example, what the author Richard Feynman says here is that in a Buddhist temple in Honolulu, he learned that to every man is given the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell. So, what we can understand from, for example, what Thoreau says, Henry David Thoreau says, that it is much more difficult for a man to understand himself than it is for a man to uh, to hire 500 men and boys and to sail round the world. It is much more difficult to sail upon one's own private sea. Um, but understanding ourselves, sailing upon our own sea, understanding the motives, understanding our actions, understanding ourselves is without doubt the key to India. India was once upon a time, it was a rich nation. So understanding ourselves is like having the wealth of India in our hands. So that's what Thoreau says, that it's much more difficult to understand oneself than it is to sail around the world with 500 men and boys to assist one sailing through cannibals and storms and tempests in uh, ship. So, how is this possible? For example, what the psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung says is that, you know, our life is like a parabola. A parabola is an inverted curve. From infancy to middle age, the parabola's curve goes upward. That is, we're striving to meet certain goals, to achieve certain ends, to do some things. But after middle age, the curve of the parabola goes down. We find ourselves sliding down. That is, the unconscious will have lost its strength. It will have been sapped of its strength. And we find ourselves sliding down the curve of the parabola on the other side to our final resting place, which is the grave. So, if a person were to act in the latter half of life as he has done in the first, then it is misery. It is the same person who is acting, both in young age and after middle age. But if he doesn't understand himself, that is, if he doesn't understand that his own strength has been sapped, then if he continues to act as he did when he was younger, then it will be misery. So, what the proverb of the Buddhist religion says is, to every man is given the key to the gates of heaven, the same key opens the gates of hell. So, no doubt there are a few points which overlap from young age to after middle age. But it should be remembered that we are not the same person that we are. And if we continue to do what we did when we were younger, then the gates of hell would be opened. To every man is given the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell. That is the proverb of the Buddhist religion, which the author, that is Richard Feynman, heard in Honolulu, and he says he has never forgotten it. So, what then is the value of the key to heaven? So, what then is the value of the key to heaven? If we do not strive, for example, when we are young, if we do not try to achieve whatever we wish to, then there is no absolute use in life. So, what then is the value of the key to heaven? It is true that if we lack clear instructions that determine which is the gate to heaven, which the gate to hell, the key may be a dangerous object to use. But it is obviously has value. How can we enter heaven without it? So, without our motives, without our impetuses, without our strength of youth, we cannot achieve the peak of life. But like a person, he doesn't have clear instructions which is the gate to heaven, which is the gate to hell. So it may be a dangerous object to use. So if we were to continue to act as we did when we were younger, then something like a gelatinous state of mildewy softness might result, because the strength of youth has been replaced by the weakness of middle age and above. So, using our own strength, using our own desires, using our own motivations after a certain period of time, it may be dangerous to use. But it obviously has value. How can we enter heaven without it? So, what the author is saying here is that science itself, all the products of science, have value, but they don't have instructions on how to use it. And if we misuse it, then it can lead to hell. So all the powers that we have may be dangerous or may result in an unwanted state of mind if we use them only for selfish ends. But obviously they have value. How can we enter heaven without it? The instructions also would be of no value without the key. So it is evident that in spite of the fact that science could produce enormous horror in the world, it is of value because it can produce something. So science itself can produce enormous horror, as was shown by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. But the same nuclear reaction can be used to produce unlimited power through nuclear fission, through nuclear power plants for humanity. So, science can produce enormous horror, but it is of value because it can produce something. Another value of science is the fun called intellectual enjoyment, which some people get from reading and learning and thinking about it, which others get from working in it. So this value, the second value of science which the author considers, is the fun, called intellectual enjoyment. So this value is hardly ever discussed by people who are who are in the field of education. So because it is great fun to know something, to use something, to achieve something, to think about something, to feel the thrill of knowing something. So this intellectual enjoyment is not considered by the people who tell the scientists that they should use their knowledge of science to help society. Scientists have become scientists because they enjoy science. So they may not find any particular relevance in solving the problems of society. So the author says, this is a very real and important point, and one which is not considered enough by those who tell us it has a social responsibility to reflect on the impact of science on society. Is this mere personal enjoyment of value to society as a whole? So if a scientist enjoys thinking and learning and working in science, is it of value to society as a whole? No. But it is also a responsibility to consider the value of society itself. So what is the value of society? Is it, in the last analysis, to arrange things so that people can enjoy things? If so, the enjoyment of science is as important as anything else. So, according to Thoreau, there is what is called division of labor in society. None of our lives is insulated. We are dependent on many others. For example, we're dependent on the tailor to make our clothes. We're dependent on a grocer to bring our vegetables. We're dependent on the milkman to provide milk. We're dependent on the carpenter to make our furniture. We're dependent on the electrician to fix our electrical gadgets. And so, the value of society is to enable people to enjoy things. So, if that is so, the enjoyment of science is as important as anything else. So, this division of labor is made so that everyone can enjoy life. But the author says, if it is one of the aims of society to enjoy life, then the enjoyment of science is as important as anything else. So just as we would not ask the carpenter to solve the problems of society, it is untenable for people to ask the scientists to solve the problems of society. That is what the author is saying. But I'd like not to underestimate the value of the worldview which is a result of the scientific effort. So the author says uh, he would not underestimate the value of the worldview. So nowadays, the world is known as a global village. That is, we can talk to anyone, anywhere within a matter of seconds, and we can communicate important, unimportant, homely, irrelevant, relevant. We can communicate all sorts of things to anyone, anywhere, within a fraction of a second, within a fraction of a second. So this is the result of uh, uh, the scientific effort. Is the next value of the scientific effort. That is, it has made the world into a global, which has given us a worldview. We've been led to imagine all sorts of things infinitely more marvelous than imaginings of poets and dreamers of the past. It shows that the imagination of nature is far, far greater than the imagination of man. So, what uh, science has proved is that we can make our lives more comfortable. But if we if we take a thinker like Thoreau, who in one of the chapters of his best-selling work, Walden, or Life in the Woods, he describes how when he noticed rainwater making cuts in the sand, which look like fingers, he goes on to describe how life reproduces. That is, the the designs in the sand made by the rainwater resemble those of a leaf. So the leaf becomes a plant becomes another life form, and so on and so on and so on, till all the forms of life are gone through, and finally we have man as the crowning creation. So Thoreau has described how, I think it's in chapter 17 of Walden, how, the cuts made by the rainwater and the sand made him think of the evolution of life. Uh, but nevertheless, the author Richard Feynman says, for instance, how much more remarkable it is for us to be stuck, half of us upside down, by a mysterious attraction to a spinning ball that has been swinging in space for billions of years, than to be carried on the back of an elephant supported on a tortoise swimming in a bottomless sea. So here the author Richard Feynman considers two descriptions of the world. One is that of gravity. Half of the world's population is stuck in the southern hemisphere, upside down by gravity to the earth, and this is described as a mysterious attraction to the spinning ball, which is the earth. The earth has been swinging in space for billions of years, and it seems to be an example of something that is in perpetual motion. But what the author compares this description of the world is with a description of the world given by religion, the Hindu religion. The Hindu religion says that the world is carried on the back of an elephant supported on a tortoise, which is swimming in a bottomless sea. So, next author says, I have thought about these things so many times alone that I hope you will excuse me if I remind you of some thoughts that I am sure you have all had, or this type of thought which no one could ever have had in the past, because people then didn't have the information we have about the world today. So in the past, when religion and literature were preponderant in the thinking of people around the world, when the whole inner world was examined ad infinitum by the seers and prophets and uh, religious heads of the past, um, uh, they couldn't have had the view of the world that we have today, because the ancients didn't have the information we have about the world today. So the author writes a poem about how life evolved from the ocean. So he says about this evolution of life, he says, for instance, I stand at the seashore alone and start to think. There are the rushing waves, mountains of molecules. So he's alone on the seashore. He starts to think. He looks at the waves, and the waves are rushing onto the shore. And the waves are described as mountains of molecules, each stupidly minding its own business. So each water molecule is separated from the next one, and each is minding its own business. There are trillions apart from one side of the seashore to the other. There are trillions and trillions of molecules, yet forming white surf in unison. Together they form the white surf. Ages on ages, before any eyes could see, ages on ages, before any eyes could see, uh, year after year, thunderously pounding the shore as of now. So this repeated action, that of the waves hitting the shore, has been going for ages on ages. An age is a period of 1,000 years, eons and eons, millions of years actually. Before there was any life on earth, before any eyes could see, the waves were hitting the shore, and the waves were on a dead planet with no life to entertain. Never at rest, tortured by energy, wasted prodigiously by the sun, poured into space. A might makes the sea roar. So, the waters of the ocean, they were tortured by energy. We never at rest, then were tortured by energy. And the water evaporating into space, into the atmosphere, is wasted prodigiously by the sunshine. And some of the water vapor goes into space. It's poured into space, and a molecule of water, a mite is a small thing. A molecule of water makes the sea roar. Deep in the sea, all molecules repeat the patterns of one another till complex new ones are formed. They make others like themselves, and so a new dance starts. So deep in the ocean, under the pressure and depth of the ocean, each molecule of water repeats its pattern, and they fuse together to form new molecules until a life form is made. And this combination and recombination of molecules in the depths and pressures of the ocean is described as a dance by the author. Growing in size and complexity, living things, masses of atoms, DNA, protein, dancing a pattern ever more intricate. So finally, after a lot of combination and recombination over millions of years, the living structure is formed, DNA is formed, protein is formed, and there are masses of atoms forming all sorts of life forms like fish and plants and so on. And each combination and recombination is more intricate, is more complex. Out of the cradle onto dry land, here it is standing, atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity. So finally, when the uh, first marine animal became an amphibian, and the amphibian became a land animal, uh, it became man. Here it is, he's referring to himself, he's referring to man. A man is described as atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity. So you don't expect matter to have curiosity, you don't expect a piece of furniture to have curiosity, but man is matter with curiosity. Stands at the sea, wonders at wondering. So he's referring to himself, he himself He stands at the sea, wonders at wondering, are a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe? So he himself is made up of a universe of atoms, but he himself is an atom in the universe. So the next part is called the grand adventure. The same thrill, the same awe and mystery come again and again when we look at any problem deeply enough. With more knowledge comes deeper, more wonderful mystery, luring one on to penetrate deeper still, never concerned that the answer may prove disappointing, but with pleasure and confidence we turn over each new stone to find unimagined strangeness, leading on to more wonderful questions and mysteries, certainly a grand adventure. So, this result of science is objective. It looks outward into the outer world, but there is also an inner world which we can come to understand ourselves if we introspect. So there are two worlds which are present in us. One is the outer world, and another is the inner world. So both have been given the relative descriptions. Here we're given a description of the outer world. It is that we gain more knowledge, more deeper knowledge, and as we gain more deeper knowledge of the external world, it's a wonderful mystery, and each mystery it, tempts us to penetrate deeper still into the external world, and we are never worried that the answer may prove disappointing. We turn over each new finding that we come across to find unimagined strangeness. Uh, and so, once we go through all the discoveries, we may come to what Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the philosopher, the American philosopher who was the mentor of Henry David Thoreau, says that when all the matter has been analyzed, it may certainly come out to just one particle, one atom, and or something more minute. In fact, it may become nothing. And out of this nothing, which has energy, energy coalesces and forms the simplest atoms like hydrogen. Hydrogen forms other more complex molecules. And so the cycle of life, it forms, it dies, it decomposes, and then it forms again. So this cycle of birth and rebirth, it is certainly a grand adventure. So it is true that few unscientific people have this particular type of religious experience as the author. So this religious experience, which people have when they introspect, is also had by the scientists when they examine the external world. Our poets do not write about it, our artists do not try to portray this remarkable thing. I don't know why. Is nobody inspired by a present picture of the universe. So, but in religion, when the religious person introspects, he may come to a song, he may come to a poem about himself, but when the scientist examines the outer world, he doesn't feel like singing about it. He's not enthusiastic enough about it. The value of science remains unsung by singers. So you're reduced to hearing not a song or a poem, but an evening lecture about it. So when they teach science, it is more like listening to an evening lecture and not listening to a song or a poem. So what the philosopher Nietzsche says is that science is democratic. By democratic we mean it may be meant that many people can understand science scientific subjects, as is seen by the preponderance of the STEM subjects being taught across the world nowadays. But hardly anyone can go deeply enough into the liberal arts like the languages or like music or dancing or sculpture. So, uh, because science is democratic, it may be that there are no songs or poems, and people are reduced to listening to an evening lecture about it. Perhaps one of the reasons is that you have to know how to read the music. So, the person who studies science has to understand it in a certain amount of depth and complexity. It is like music. If you understand the subject of science in a certain depth and complexity, the author gives an example. For instance, the scientific article says perhaps something like this: the radioactive um, phosphorus content of the cerebrum of the rat decreases to one half in a period of 2 weeks. So the scientific article which the author has read says that there is radioactive phosphorus in the cerebrum, that is in one of the parts of the brain of the rat, and this radioactivity content decreases to one half of its value because every radioactive element has got what is called a half-life period, during which the original amount decreases to half its value over a certain period of time. So the scientific article says that the radioactive phosphorus decreases to one half of its original value in a period of 2 weeks. The author asks, what does that mean? It means that the phosphorus that is in the brain of the rat and also in mine and yours is not the same phosphorus as it was 2 weeks ago, and but that all of the atoms that are in the brain are being replaced and the ones that were there before have gone away. So what the meaning of the scientific article is, according to the author, that not only the radioactive phosphorus in the brain of the rat, but the whole brain is being replaced. Not only the brain of the rat, but also the brain of the author, the brain of everyone in the world is being replaced. So what is this mind? What are these atoms with consciousness? Last week's potatoes. So the atoms we have today are like last week's potatoes. They've gone stale and they will be replaced. That is what no one now, that is what uh, that is what now can remember what was going on in my mind a year ago, mind which has long ago been replaced. So a person can remember what was going on in his mind a year ago, but that mind has long ago been replaced. The brain itself has been replaced, just as the nails keep growing and being cut and skin keeps growing and the bones change. You know, every particle of us is being renewed over a period of time, and we are not the same person that we were a few years ago. So, to note that the thing that I call my individuality is only a pattern or dance. So whatever a person makes him individual, whatever he's good at, whatever is special to him, whatever special skill he has, it is only a pattern or dance of atoms and molecules. The atoms come into my brain, dance a dance, then go out. Always new attempts, but always doing the same dance, considering what the dance was yesterday. So the atoms, when they are replaced, transfer the knowledge to the atoms that they're replaced by. So the atoms will remember the dance that was going on yesterday. The remarkable idea. When we read about this in the newspaper, it says the scientists says that the discovery may have importance in the cure for cancer. So the discovery that the radioactive phosphorus in the content in the cerebrum of the rat decreases to half its value over a period of 2 weeks may have relevance to the cure for cancer. The paper is only interested in the use of the idea, not the idea itself. Hardly anyone can understand the importance of an idea. It is so remarkable, except that possibly some children catch on. So, and when a child catches on to an idea like that, we have a scientist. So, if we were to explain these things in depth to children, and if it excites them enough, they may become scientists. These ideas do filter down in spite of all the conversation about TV replacing thinking and the and lots of kids get the spirit, and when they have the spirit, you have a scientist. So if we explain these things to children, then we may make a scientist of them. It is too late for them to get the spirit when they are in our universities, so we must attempt to explain these ideas to children. I'd like now to turn to a third value that science has. It is little more indirect, but not enough. The scientist has a lot of experience with ignorance and doubt and uncertainty. So we can never be sure of what we know. That's what the author is saying. So the scientist also has a lot of experience with ignorance and doubt and uncertainty. When a scientist doesn't know the answer to a problem, he is ignorant. When he has a hunch as to what the result is, he is uncertain. And when he's pretty darn sure of what the result is going to be, he's still in some doubt. So what the philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson says about this is that with the business of the day, we are uncertain. We lack the words, we lack the thoughts, we lack the ideas about what to do about something in life. But given enough time and given the right effort, then the same thing which was dull and weighed us down will soar into the empyrean, it will soar into the sky, and it will have beautiful wings. So what his protege, Miss Henry David Thoreau, says that we may as well wish success to our endeavors. So whatever we try, we can wish success to our endeavors, and so it is so with the scientist, according to the author Richard Feynman. So when a scientist doesn't know the answer to the problem, he is ignorant. That is, he is dull and weighed down by the problem. When he has a hunch as to what the result is, he is uncertain. When he can guess what the result will be after performing his experiment, he is still uncertain. And when he's pretty darn sure of what the result is going to be, he's still in some doubt. We have found it of paramount importance that in order to progress, we must recognize the ignorance and leave room for doubt. So we must never be sure that we have all the answers. We must leave room for doubt. So that is so with the business of life. Many people are weighed down with about what to do, what to think, what life is like. So, this the author finds of paramount importance. In order to progress, we must recognize the ignorance and leave room for doubt. Scientific knowledge is a body of statements of varying degrees of certainty, some most unsure, some nearly sure, none absolutely certain. So, scientific knowledge, the whole of physics, chemistry, maths, biology, is a body of statements of varying degrees of certainty. Some are mostly unsure, some are nearly sure, but none is absolutely certain because we can keep adding. And just as Einstein added a footnote to Newton's laws through his theory of gravitation, through his theory of relativity, so none of the statements of science are absolutely certain. Now we as scientists are used to this, and we take it for granted. It's perfectly consistent to be unsure. It's possible to live and not know. And so it is possible to live and not know. But I don't know whether everyone realizes that this is true. Our freedom to doubt was born of a struggle against authorities in the early days of science. It was a very deep and strong struggle. Permit us to question, to doubt. That that's all. Not to be sure. So, and I think it is that we do not forget the importance of the struggle, and thus perhaps lose what we have gained. Herein lies a responsibility to society. So scientists should uh, impose their views on the general public that they are in doubt, that they are ignorant of many things, that they cannot solve the problems of society, and so it is of paramount importance that scientists uh, uh, informs the public that there's a lot of ignorance even in as knowledgeable a person as the author himself as a scientist. We're all sad when we think of the wondrous possibilities human beings seem to have as contrasted with their small accomplishments. So everyone feels that is the king of the world. Everyone feels that he rules the earth, wind, and the sky. But while he feels that, while there are wonderful, wondrous potentialities human beings seem to have, the actual accomplishments are very small. Again and again, people have thought that we could do much better. So it is a fact that our feelings are also guides. But as we said, we can be not be absolutely certain that our feelings are our true guides, and therefore, mm, people have scientists have thought, people have thought we could do much better. They of the past saw in the nightmare of their times a dream for the future. So, in the nightmare of the past, for example, when the world was overcome by so many diseases, so many illnesses, medical technology stepped in and helped alleviate many of the diseases. There were vaccines, there were inoculations, there were all sorts of diseases which were cured from it, and now many of those diseases are avoidable because of the discovery. So, in the nightmare of their times, the people of the past saw a dream for the future. We of the future see that their dreams in certain ways are past and in many ways remain dreams. So while some problems which are present today, were also present in the past, uh, we have not found the answer to the problems of which are common to both the present and the past. The hopes for the future today are in a good share those of yesterday. And so, education for good and evil. Once some thought that the possibilities people had were not developed because most of these people were ignorant. So it was thought that because of ignorance, the possibilities of people were not realized. With education universal, could all men be Voltaires? What the author asks, if everyone were to be educated, could all men become thinkers like Voltaire? So, what Henry David Thoreau says is that there will never be a nation of philosophers, there will never be a nation of thinkers like Voltaire, and indeed it is not desirable that it should be. So, but bad can be taught at least as efficiently as good. So, bad students can be taught at least as efficiently as good people, good students. Education is a strong force, but for either good or evil. Communications between nations must provide understanding, so went another thing. So if we communicated with each other, if we laid bare our thoughts and ideas to each other, then the world would be a better place. So went another dream. But the machines of communication can be channeled, or choked. So what happened during World War II was that communication, even today, there are certain certain factors, facets of communication like propaganda, which choke the communication between nations. What is communicated can be truth or lie. Communication is a strong force also, but for either good or bad. The applied sciences should free men of material problems at least. Medicine controls diseases, and here the record seems all to the good. Yet there are men patiently working to create great plagues and poisons. They are to be used in warfare tomorrow. So, even though medical science has progressed hugely, there's still some scientists working on biological warfare. Nearly everybody dislikes war. Our dream today is peace. In peace, man can develop best the enormous possibilities he seems to have, but maybe future men will find that peace too can be good and bad. Perhaps peaceful men will drink out of boredom, then perhaps drink will become the great problem, which seems to keep man from getting all he thinks he should out of his abilities. So here we have a reflection of the ideas of Hegel, Hegel, who was a German philosopher, who says that once a system comes into being, then after a certain time, the opposite of the system will also come into being. These two, the system and its opposite, clash, and a third being is brought forth, and that will continue until it produces opposite, and so on and so forth. This pattern is repeated according to the thinker Hegel. So now we have some problems. If we solve all the problems, then something else may come as out of this. The author gives example that our dream today is to have peace on earth. If peace on earth is achieved, then peaceful men will become bored, and in their boredom they start to drink, and because then drink will become the next big problem. So, so drink will stop people from getting all they think out of their ability. Clearly, peace is a great force, as is sobriety and material power, communication, education, honesty, and ideals of many dreamers. So there are many great forces like sobriety. Sobriety is the ability to think clearly without being drunk or intoxicated by alcohol. Peace is a great force. Material power is wealth is a great force. Communication, education, honesty, and ideals of many dreamers are great forces in society. We have more of these forces to control than did the ancients. So today we have more of these good forces to control. And maybe we're doing a little better than most of them could. But what we ought to do seems to be gigantic compared with our confused accomplishments. Why is this? Why can't we conquer ourselves? Because we find that even great forces and abilities do not carry instructions with them, do not carry with them clear instruction on how to use them. As an example, the great accumulation of understanding as to how the physical world behaves only convinces one that this behavior seems to have a kind of meaninglessness. So there's a great deal of there are many discoveries made about the physical world. In the first, there was the atom, thought about by the Greeks. Then the atom was split into the electron, proton, and neutron. Then the proton and electron were seen to be made up of things like strings, and strings were thought to be made up of particles, and even particles are made up of something. So all this understanding about the physical world only convinces the author that this behavior seems to have a kind of meaninglessness. The sciences do not directly teach good and bad. Through all the ages, men have tried to fathom the meaning of life. They have realized that if some directional meaning could be given to our actions, great human forces would be unleashed. So very many answers have been given to the question of the meaning of it all. So what is the meaning of life? What is the one absolute truth that everyone can depend on? There is no such absolute truth. because according to the philosopher Nietzsche, there is not the truth, but a truth. There is a truth for each, which is special to each individual, which is special to each individual object and person, and there's not one single truth which is common to all. And what Henry David Thoreau, the American philosopher, says is that uh, no one, even the wisest man, has learned nothing of absolute value by living. But there have been of different sorts, and the proponents of one answer have been looked with horror at the actions of believers in another. So, what is the meaning of it all? One thinker suggests this, another thinker suggests that. So, what is the meaning of it all? Uh, Horror because, from a disagreeing point of view, all the great potentialities of the race were being channeled into a false and confining blind alley. So, for example, if we take the example of religion, Hinduism goes in a direction, Islam goes in another direction, Buddhism goes in a third direction, Jainism goes in a fourth direction. So, each proponent of each way of thinking doesn't agree with the other way of thinking. So it leads to a false and confining blind alley. One of the ways we can think of is that the description of God given in many religions, in all the religions, is a description of God together. So all the religions together describe God in one way. That's one way we may think about it. So, if we don't have a bird's eye view of the picture of the thing, then we may be going into a blind and confining blind alley. In fact, it is from the history of enormous monstrosities created by false belief that philosophers have realized the apparently infinite and wondrous capacities of human beings. The dream is to find the open channel. So, um, what the philosopher Henry David Thoreau says is that he wants to go on a way under which no power on earth can stop him. So that is also what science proposes according to author Richard Feynman. The dream is to find the open channel. What then is the meaning of it all? What can we say to dispel the mystery of existence? If we take everything into account, not only what the ancients knew, but all of what we know today that they didn't know, I think that we may frankly admit that we do not know. So, as Henry David Thoreau says, that the wisest man has done nothing of absolute value, which is true for everyone and everything on earth. So, even today, even though scientists have a lot of knowledge about so many things, both the inner world and the outer world, we do not know what the meaning of it all is. This is not a new idea, this is the idea of the age of reason. This is a philosophy that guided the man who made the democracy that we live under. So the democracy we live under was formed during the French Revolution when the aristocratic government, form of government, was overthrown by the people, and the people chose their own leaders, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, because the rulers, the kings and queens of France, were cruel and despotic. The people overthrew them. So, what was one idea was replaced by another. So, uh, the idea that no one really knew how to run a government led to the idea we could arrange a system by which new ideas could be developed, tried, and tossed out. More new ideas brought in, a trial and error system. So, what democracy is also, may also not be right, because according to a suggestion made by Einstein, there should be one government in the world, not governments of many countries, but one government. But this is a trial and error system. This method was a result of the fact that science was already showing itself to be a successful venture at the end of the 18th century. Even then, it was clear to socially minded people openness of the possibilities was an opportunity, and that doubt and discussion were essential to progress into the unknown. So, what the future is, what the philosopher Henry David Thoreau says is that even though he has such a great deal of knowledge about the earth and about divinity and about nature, he still doesn't know what to do on one summer afternoon. So it is unknown. The future is mostly unknown. So doubt and discussion are essential to progress into the unknown. If we want to solve a problem that we have never solved before, we must leave the door to the unknown ajar. So we must admit that we don't know everything and we must leave the door to the unknown ajar. So finally, the author, Richard Feynman, comes to the last part, our responsibility as scientists. We are at the very beginning of time for the human race. It is not unreasonable that we grapple with problems. There are tens of thousands of years in the future. Our responsibility is to do what we can, learn what we can, improve the solutions, and pass them on. It is our responsibility to leave the men of the future a free hand. So we must do our part to make the future generations a bit better. In the impetuous youth of humanity, we make grave errors that can stunt our growth for a long time. This we will do if we say we have the answers now, so young and ignorant. So if we say we know the answers, all the answers, then we are placing a block on our own thinking and will go into a false and confining blind alley. So we must admit that we don't have all the answers. We can improve, do what we can, improve what we can, and leave the future generations a free hand. If we suppress all discussion, all criticism, saying this is it, boys, man is saved, and thus doom man for a long time to the chains of authority, confined to the limits of our present imagination. It has been done so many times before. So the idea of God, which ruled the world for many centuries, was one such false and confining blind alley because people were forced to worship God and not do anything for themselves until science came along and said that man can control his own destiny through considered effort to achieve what he wants, going step by step to achieve what he wants. So, if people say, this is it, boys, man is saved, then we will doom man for a long time to the chains of authority as was done with religion. It has been done so many times before, says the author. It is our responsibility as scientists, knowing the great progress and great value of satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, the great progress that is the fruits of freedom of thought, to proclaim the value of this freedom, to teach how doubt is not to be feared but welcomed and discussed, and to demand this freedom as our duty to all coming generations. So we must admit that we do not know the answer to something before we can come to the answer through a trial and error method, which may be successful. So that is the philosophical and psychoanalytic and maybe literary interpretation of the article "The Value of Science" by the Nobel Prize winning author Richard Feynman, which was, as I said, delivered before the National Academy of Sciences in the US at the California Institute of Technology in Berkeley in the year 1955. Thank you.